Hello everyone and welcome to Our Mind on Music, Season 3, Episode 25. This is Episode 77 overall, so we're slowly creeping towards Episode 100. I'm really happy to be speaking today with Andy Isacsson in Glasgow, Scotland. Andy is a composer, songwriter, multi-instrument musician, super interesting person to chat with. Andy goes by the name Luminous, artistically. His album Precarious Karma, Studies of the Absolute, was over a decade in the making, which Andy will explain a little bit in our conversation here. I know you're in for a treat here. The music is fantastic, the production is fantastic, and I was really happy to discover that Andy is a great person to chat with as well. So here's Andy Isacsson, Luminous, speaking about his music, his life, and his album Precarious Karma, Studies of the Absolute. So I'm really happy we're chatting. I've been listening to your album again and again, and I was trying to figure out what it is about your album that I just absolutely love it. I listened to it and I thought, okay, there are a couple of things that I love. One of them is that I suspect you and I would have a similar type of either record collection or playlists, which would be varied. I don't really listen to music with genre in mind, and I suspect you would say the same thing.
I can happily. So this morning I had Gurdjieff on. Do you know the philosopher?
No.
The 20th century philosopher. A lot of the kind of hippie ideas came from Gurdjieff. A lot of, for example, things that Aleister Crowley took a hold of and ran with came from Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff, I think it is. So the kind of whole idea of Orientalism, he was one of the big players in that. He was very, very influential. But he wrote a couple of cello concertos. Wow. And that's what I had on this morning. I had punk on the other day. I did jazz on. I've had ambient on. I've had electronic music. I think kind of the only music I don't really listen to is rock.
Interesting. I mean, I listen to everything. In fact, I used to say there were two types of music that I prefer not to listen to. One was country music, and the other was opera.
I've changed your mind on both of those today.
Yeah, well, you know, the funny thing is it wasn't about, for me, it was about the timbres of their voices.
I completely understand that. The thing with opera, for me, is the timbre of the voices, is there's so many of them. It's kind of like, I completely get what you're saying, but it's kind of like listening to rock music and you don't like the tone. For example, you don't like the tone of Eddie Van Halen, for example.
Okay.
But you find that you love the tone of Hendrix. I think Eddie Van Halen's an amazing tone. Just to say in the rock music, the reason I don't listen to rock music is I spent years and years and years being a rock guy. So it kind of doesn't really push me anymore. So it's not that I kind of don't actually like it. There's so many other things out there that I don't know how to do. Without, hopefully that doesn't sound egotistical. But on the timbre, there's a couple of things that play there. One of them is, if you take somebody, let's say Maria Callas, who I'm sure you've heard.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Maria Callas has a fabulous timbre, in my opinion, but the recordings are terrible. So the actual recordings, and due to the technology of the time, enhance any harshness that's in there. You can listen to the same piece by, let's say, 4 or 5 different singers, particularly sopranos, and one will just be the most amazing thing. Everything else will just be grating. It's kind of, it's about exploring. I kind of discovered it because I pretty much listened to everything else. I never got opera. And one day I just decided I'm going to go to the opera because I've never done it. Just absolutely never done this. and it was Rigoletto. And I sat there in the same way that I sat there watching Star Wars for the first time when I was a kid. It was just, well, you kind of have to get it as a whole at an opera with the sets, with the plots, with the fact it's completely overblown is what's fantastic about it. It's like, listen, say, Ronnie James Dio, you can easily fault with that's completely overblown and it's completely ridiculous. But that's the point.
I think that's what sort of was part of what annoyed me a little bit previously, was I was like, nobody sings like that, nobody moves like that. And then I thought, maybe that's what makes it unique, and that's what at least part of the charm of it, you know?
It's kind of like watching Bollywood movies. And again, to make the same point, it's raison d'etre. This whole point is overblown. It's ridiculous. It's extreme emotion. And something like, I could kind of relate it to something like black metal. I'm fascinated by black metal, but I don't particularly like it. But it's everything to an extreme. And I think once you take it as that, because it makes more sense.
I remember years and years ago, I was in a class and the teacher was talking about Picasso's Guernica. Right?
I've seen it in the flesh. It's astonishing.
Yeah, me too, actually. And I was blown away. I didn't realize how big it was.
This thing just swamps the room with the intensity of it.
One of the things that I said to the teacher that I was talking to, I said, it's really ugly. And the teacher said, well, it's a picture of war. That moment when she said that, I was like, I get it. It's supposed to be ugly because it's depicting something ugly. And
yes.
So what you say about the death metal or black metal, you know, those kinds of things, likewise, I don't look at Guernica now and say, that's so amazing, like so beautiful, but I do understand what he was saying.
I'm glad I'm doing it, but I'm glad somebody is doing it. I think it's possibly quite important to be that extreme.
You gotta move yourself on to a higher plane. You need the help of the good Lord. You gotta call my name. You want money, want a big black car.
I'm going to suggest that, but I'm going to country music. I'm going to suggest that 90% of every type of music is terrible.
That's interesting.
If we're not counting all the things that we take as classics and as fantastic, if you think of, for example, how many blues albums there are out there, yet we think about how many 10, 20, 30 people. Right. And that's probably about 2% of the amount of people that are out there. So if we kind of look at it like that in any genre, 90% of everything is terrible. 90% of TV programs are awful.
I would go higher on the percentage with that one.
Yes, I could possibly go higher on that as well. But with movies, for example, we only remember the good ones.
Yeah. I love that. I think what you're saying there works for a lot of reasons. One of them is the concept where people say, well, they don't make songs like that anymore. You know, like they've written songs that say that. So I listen to songs that are coming out now. You know, I think of some of the new artists that I've been listening to that I think are great. Of course, they don't make songs like that anymore because you're taking the cream of the crop from at least a decade of music. You know, you say, I love 70s music. Well, how many songs do you remember from the 70s? You know, 100? Okay, how many songs were made in the 70s?
Thousands and thousands. It's like you talk about the golden age of the late 60s. Yeah. Most of the stuff that's in the charts was terrible. Itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini. Something like the Small Faces got to number 7, and that's what we remember.
Yeah, yeah.
Bits and Pieces was number 1 for I don't know, 7 weeks or something like that. we don't think that's a classic. That's amazing stuff. So country music, I think it's really easy to disparage country music, and I think it's really easy because in a lot of cases it deserves it. It's generic, it's idiotic in quite a lot of cases. It's thoughtless, it's factory made, but so is a lot of Motown.
Absolutely. And when what you said, so I don't know if you'll agree on this little list, but I mean, if I think about Johnny Cash and some of the Glenn Campbell stuff, just his guitar playing especially, I could find a list of country artists that I would say some of those songs are just great songs. Johnny Cash is one of the ones where I think he's got some great songs.
Absolutely amazing songs. I'll give you two words. Graham Parsons. When I talk about it, I like country. I like Graham Parsons and about three other people. Graham Parsons is, I think, the guy that will change your mind. We haven't really talked about your music at all at this point, but a lot of your songs are instrumental, not a lot of lyrics in there. In fact, one of the things that you tended to do with this album was to use samples of other people talking, I guess, to sit alongside with and to help to set the mood of the piece of music. There's the great thing with the Vietnamese Buddhist teacher.
The beautiful rivers, the beautiful trees, everything wonderful, everything refreshing. You want to get in touch. They are in the present moment. Therefore, running to the future.
I find them liberating to a very great extent. And I kind of felt that there was a lightness that was needed at that point. And I don't know if you noticed, the whole album was about religion.
I was going to ask about that. Was that very specific? Was it sort of, because I think I would have said religion and your relation to it, I think was...
Yes, that's actually a much better way to put it.
In the past, you miss life.
So I'm fascinated by religion. I always have been. I always thought I would go to university when I'm the age I am now and study theology. I'm not a believer, but I'm a sort of quasi-Buddhist. But I'm always fascinated by it because I think if you understand religion, you understand humanity and you understand society because it shapes it so much. And I didn't actually realise until I had really rough versions of all the songs sitting together that's what it was about. I didn't notice, it wasn't deliberate, so it sort of ended up a concept album, but I didn't start out as a concept album.
That's amazing that you just said that, because just not too long ago, actually, like minutes before we actually signed on to chat here, I was thinking, for me, your album, one of the things, part of the answer to my question to myself, why do I love this so much, was it felt like I was watching a movie without visuals. It feels like even
That's a compliment here all day, thank you.
Even the tone of your voice in the different songs, it's like you become different characters. There's the Peter Gabriel sounding character in a few of the songs, and then there's a totally different voice, and then you bring in the female singers who bring in a different character.
Thank you. That was kind of the intention. What I did want to do is make something for me. That was the most important thing. And I wanted something that, and I can still do it with that album, so I can't do much of my music, to be honest. I can still do that, put that on. The whole idea is you put it on and it's an album and you listen to it from beginning to end. And that's part of the reason I disagreed with it going on streaming services, because streaming services are an anathema to that way of listening.
An album is a book, and each chapter is very important for that book.
I just came across this clip of Jack Antonoff talking about the importance of making full-length albums. Check it out.
Album is God, period. Always has been.
He thinks like I do.
But that's how I listen to music. So I listen to an album as start to end. And that's what I've always done. That's what makes sense to me. I tried streaming services and I hated them because the whole, apart from I thought this sounded terrible. That just sounded pretty bad. The whole premise of them was to kind of get you, listen to a snippet of this, listen to this next snippet. And I don't think that's a healthy way to listen to music for me.
Yeah.
And possibly for a lot of people of our generation.
I've been learning more and more about that very recently. So a couple of things. There's a young, really talented guitarist, singer, musician that has put out a couple of albums recently, and I've spoken to him here on Our Mind on Music. It's Mickey Maffey. Symptoms of Lunacy is what he calls his project. There's something about the way he approaches it that you just talked about. He was talking about how he spent quite a long time thinking about his song stack for his album. So the order that you would hear the pieces of music matters. It's sequential, right?
A song is kind of a snapshot into one set of emotions or feelings, usually, unless it's the greatest story ever told. There's plenty of songs like that, but I think that with an album, I can kind of go through that full range of emotions, the good and the bad, as opposed to just singles might, like I said, be snapshots. I don't know.
And on a related note, there are streaming services that are starting up now, which set up their streaming so that they don't direct you like a Spotify does, for example, where they're just trying to hook you and hook you and hook you. There's Stage Dive streaming service. These guys just present a place where people like yourself can put music and people like me can listen to your music in order. You know, like on Bandcamp, it just plays one song after the other.
Fantastic about Bandcamp.
Yeah. So that's, as you know, where I listened to your music. And I think that was one of the big strengths of it, was that it wasn't jumping in with a commercial, and it wasn't forcing me to listen to 7 other songs that I don't care about before I could listen to your song, you know? So I do know that there are people who are thinking like what you just said in terms of the importance of telling the whole story, one story after the other, and the importance of people who are setting up platforms to allow that to happen, to not be telling us how we should be enjoying our music.
Yes. I think there's possibly a change afoot. I think we're starting to see the pushback against things like Spotify. This is really good. One of the reasons that I made it a paid-for album was primarily so that anybody that listened to it would have value. It wouldn't be a throwaway. And because if anybody wants to message me and doesn't have any bucks, then I'll send you a free copy. That's fine. It wasn't about the money. It was to make it stand out in some way, to make it have value.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I still buy albums, I buy books. I buy all the things I love, and I think that's really important. For any of your listeners, I'll give you a bunch of codes so that people can get free copies if they like.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to do that.
That's great. So for those of you watching or listening right now, Andy has sent me 10 codes that you can redeem for a free digital copy of his album Precarious Karma Studies of the Absolute on Bandcamp. The first 10 people who send a comment on YouTube or on Stage Dive will receive a code and a redeem link for Bandcamp. I look forward to hearing from you.
Also, the other thing that can happen was obviously I got very ill during the making of it. So I kind of started making it, and I realised that I was going to have to up my game instrumentally and vocally. So I started a kind of a practice routine that lasted about 2 years of about 12 to 15 instruments a day. And I kind of broke that down into 5-10 minute chunks. It becomes manageable then.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing it for an hour at a time, there's no chance you're ever going to be able to do that. But as I started to get that point where I could actually play the parts that needed to be played,
yeah.
I got very ill, and I obviously didn't. I don't think anybody expects to get ill, but I spend and still spend a very long time lying in bed where I'm not able to handle any sensory information. So I can't listen to music, I can't read a book, I can't have a conversation with my wife. The curtains are closed, I've got an eye mask on to cut out any light whatsoever. But what that did do is I was able to construct Precarious Karma in my head, because for a period of about, I think, 4 years, if I could manage an hour a week in the studio, I took that as a win. But what I did was in my head, I built it and built it. And as we were talking about, I think panning, I think that's possibly where the panning came from. It's where the frequency shifts came from. It's because there's no other way I could work on it. There was literally nothing else I could do. I was either that or meditate.
Right.
Meditating gets, for very, very long periods of time, gets quite old very quickly. So it kind of was constructed in my head, and I had to find out a way to do that. So that was kind of easier in a certain way. I knew what the overall picture should look like. I just didn't know how to make the overall picture.
Yeah. That's interesting, because a couple of things. First, then you could hear what we're just talking about. If you're by yourself in a room trying to record, it's hard to hear the big picture. But if you spend hours, days, weeks imagining it in your head, then you know what you want the whole thing to end up sounding like. And now it's just a matter of how to find the right recipe and proportion. Yeah.
So that was, I don't know if that's what made it. But it was certainly an aspect of it.
I just, for me, there's no moment where I thought, like, this happens even in some of my favorite albums, where there's a moment where I think, oh, maybe they could have done this thing instead. Like, maybe they could have done a harmony here instead of that single vocal, just things like that, And that's just me imagining. It's not like the actual piece of music is missing anything. It's just I'm thinking, oh, I might have done this, or I might have.
It's interesting because that's what we do.
But I can't think, and I'm going to go back and listen to this again as I'm editing our conversation, etc. But I can't think of a moment where I heard in one of the pieces on this album where I went, oh, I wouldn't have done that. Or where I said, oh, I should. I really didn't hear a point where I thought, very, yeah, I didn't see a hole in it.
Thank you. That possibly comes from constructing in my head. And I also had intention to, and I don't know if I did it fully in every song, once I had everything to go through and ditch 10% of it regardless.
That's interesting. Maybe that's where the air came from.
Yeah, kind of just shaving things off. Do I need that?
Yeah.
Will I be disappointed if I listen to that and that isn't there? And that I ask that at every part, even though lots of it is ludicrously layered and dense. I did kind of go through, and everything had to have a purpose, had to have a reason to be there.
It's funny that you say that, because I'm thinking about what is the name of the guy who did ELO?
Jeff Lynne.
Sorry?
Jeff Lynne.
Jeff Lynne, yeah. There's an interview when he's talking about making some of the early recordings. And he was talking about he recorded like 6 different pianos playing the same part, you know? But he wasn't aware enough at that point in his development to know that you have to offset them by time or offset them by frequencies or whatever. He was just playing the same part exactly 6 times. And then he listened to it and realized, if I take away 5 of those pianos, it sounds exactly the same. I could literally just turn up the one part, you know? And I'm thinking, because I think as you were talking there, that's exactly what I did with Birth of a Star, the piece that I just mentioned to you. I remember there was one moment where I had 3 different flutes playing the same line, except I had panned one to the left, one to the right, and one down the middle. So hard left, hard right, down the middle. And I realized, if really, now that does create some sort of effect, but in a thing that has 60 tracks worth of instruments, having the one down the middle would have been exactly the same, probably stronger if I just had the one track slightly offset to one side or the other.
Yep, absolutely. It's orchestration. And
well, that's the thing. I wouldn't put, like, other than volume, I can't imagine why I would put 3 unison flutes sitting beside each other in line together.
Volume isn't an issue in the recording.
That's it. So, and I can't think of any time that I put 3 flutes sitting one behind the other, or like on a bus.
I get that. I absolutely get that. I found personally that if there was troublesome things in scoring them, made the difference, because I think scoring something is a focus and I think once you start kind of doing that, this is important, this isn't.
Yeah.
This is blab, this isn't. And part of that is because scoring is so slow. It certainly is for me anyway.
Yeah, I think on balance it is slower. I do think what you just said there, it made me think of a statement that you said before about making your album a paid album, which gives it value. There's a value to it then. And I think scoring, I do that. That's a big part of what my everyday is scoring music for kids to play. Because as a music teacher, I'm not meant to just say, okay, kids, go on YouTube and figure it out. I'm meant to also be teaching them how to read and other stuff. Anyway, first of all, I just love doing that. I really enjoy arranging pieces and stuff like that. But I do sometimes move, like I have the violins and then for example, the violas and the cellos and the bass, and sometimes I'll move it. So I'll put, like on Muse Score, you can grab the instruments and put them beside each other.
Yep.
So I'll move the bass up and put it with the first violin, and then just play those 2 and see how that fits together, And so I do see the value in that.
There was, I mean, I love scoring, and I kind of find that I get lost in doing it, but I do find there's only so much I can do of it, and there's something therapeutic. Do you know what it is? I'll tell you exactly what it is. I feel like a real musician.
That's interesting because I remember there was criticism once when Roger Daltrey had decided, this is like in the 90s or something, he decided he was going to do, is it the penny opera? I think it was. He was going to do opera anyway.
Sounds familiar.
And Paul McCartney had decided to do some classical music. He was working with an orchestra, and people were saying, "Oh, they're just trying to show, like, they're trying to show off and make themselves look all musician-y, you know?" I know what you mean when you say that, but at the same time, I do think that very much like you've played in funk bands and you've played in jazz bands, and for me, it doesn't feel like us trying to look musician-like. And I'm not saying that's what you said. I just mean that when I hear a criticism like that, I think, you know what? I just want to explore every color available on the spectrum to make this picture, the whole picture.
It's a tool. I think written music is beautiful.
Yeah.
Is absolutely beautiful. One of the things that happened when I first got ill is I started to lose the ability to process. So I would very much struggle if we were sitting in a room together. I wouldn't be able to process you talking and also the speech, etc. My brain would just shut down. But as I noticed this was starting to happen, I thought, what do I actually want to keep? Because I know I'm losing things. So I'm losing, and I worked out what I wanted to keep to be able to still process and still work with is written music. And what I lost was television. Because I kind of put, I compared these two things and which one do I want to keep? Because I knew that I wasn't keeping everything. That wasn't going to happen.
Right.
I made the focus on written music. So one of the first things I started to do was just work in little scores, read scores for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. And I'm so thankful that I managed to keep that. The scoring makes me, it makes me feel like a proper musician. It makes me feel like I'm not cheating.
That's a good way to say it. It allows us to try something that feels like a challenge. It's kind of like when you, for that guitar solo, felt like you were floating, whereas I loved it and I thought it was perfect. But what matters at that moment is how you feel about what you're creating.
Sorry to interrupt. It's more the idea of a guitar solo felt like I was coasting or floating. Because that's the actual physical playing of it was torturous. Due to kind of obvious reasons. So that's kind of why I kept it, because I had to struggle to get it. It didn't feel like I was throwing it out there. But the idea of a guitar solo there, I think it's quite an obvious one.
That's interesting. I will definitely be going back and listening to that song again with that in mind. And sometimes I really want some complexity in the flavors, and I want to be able to, like that not sitar part, be able to not really tell what it is. Sometimes I just want a piece of chewing gum.
Yeah.
You know? And I think it's okay in terms of life being about balance.
Yes, that's what I'm hopefully learning. But that's all. It's more to do with me than about life. Should be about balance, but I've always struggled to find that balance. And as I say, it's more about me than it is about anything else. remember when we first bought records, I used to get pocket money, and I would go to the local record shop, and they sold second-hand records. And the guy that ran it would put on records, because I could only afford one at a time. He would put on records to eventually go, this is the one I want. And I would go home with my second-hand record, and I'd put it on, and put it on. And then eventually, I would swap that for a couple of weeks with the one that my friend had got, and I would put that on. And I think that's how you learn. That's maybe why I don't want to say we have a dearth of learning anymore, because I don't think we do. But why it's more difficult to learn, where everything comes, here's a 10-second, the TikTok culture, basically, which I don't think is psychologically healthy.
Well, you know, I was in Japan for Christmas, or for part of Christmas break, with my daughter who's 17, and we went to Tower Records.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was really cool. The coolest thing for me was that she was the one who wanted to go there. Like, she suggested it, and I was like, yes. It was what you just talked about. Like, it was vinyl and CDs, and they had listening stations, which I remember were really important. In Toronto, we used to go to Sam the Record Man, and we'd be able to listen to songs and decide what we wanted to spend our, $5, $10 on, because that's all the money we had. For people who are watching this video right now, I've just noticed that for the last 12 minutes, I wasn't recording. And we just had an amazing conversation about recording processes and the idea of using things like panning sound from left to right.
Just to kind of sum up, panning is hugely important to me.
Yeah.
It's how I hear music coming from spaces. And it's also, panning to an extent is a cheat.
That's interesting. Why do you say that?
Because if you can't get two things sitting well together, separating them can make them sit well.
That's interesting.
So it's a very, very handy cheat for things like frequency clashes. And if you're going to put the amount of instruments that I put in, then panning becomes a necessity, I think.
Well, that's really interesting what you just said, because one of the things that I felt about all of your songs was that at specific moments, there was a lot of room. There was a lot of space. I think of the whole thing like the song has to fit into a box, and there's a certain volume possible, but you don't have to fill the whole box.
No.
There were moments when you did, for a reason, like The World Still Turns. When the guitar comes in, there's like an intensity, sort of a desperation to that song, it feels to me like, and the guitar solo is so well done in that sense. The way that you EQ'd it, the way you panned it slightly to one side. It feels like you might have used a compressor on it or something to make it feel a little bit more boxed in, not so free.
I think it was recorded very loud.
Ah, okay.
I suspect, and I'm quite a fan of compression. Hopefully, the right amount of compression. A lot of it, there's a vocal on the other side, and I still wanted that chorus to keep going. So they kind of had to shift to leave the stuff that was going on in the centre, because that was keeping the rhythm going off it. So a little thing that you hear, it sounds like a synth, and there's actually a bass.
Oh.
So it's a bass played through, I think, 2 fuzz boxes, a filter, and I think it may have been like a 2-handed part in the bass.
Okay.
I can't remember. It's a long time. It's been a long time since I've done it. So it's kind of leaving spaces for things that I want to continue. Because basically the song falls apart if they're not there.
Right.
But still kind of make room for it. And I fought with myself long and hard as to whether to put a guitar solo in.
Interesting. Because for me, that was, I mean, I loved listening to the song from beginning to end, but that was the moment for me when I thought, oh, it's all tying together. And for me, it brought it all together.
I kind of feel if I play guitar solo, that I'm kind of cheating. It's difficult to explain, but I'm kind of cheating because there's so many songs that the guitar solo has been put in because it seems they can't think of something else to do. In a lot of cases, I think I read Jeff Beck saying something like that. It's don't put it in just because it's expected. Right. Put it in because it's a thing to put in. It's because it's what the music needs. But part of it is I don't feel like I'm pushing myself with a guitar solo.
Interesting.
I very, very much had to for that. And that's a lot of time due to make it. I'm not able to practice as much as I used to. So actually, I physically struggle to do these things now. So that's kind of why I kind of accepted it in there.
Really? The perspective on that for me is amazing because, as I just said, for me, it wasn't a cop-out. It didn't feel like when I'm making these videos, sometimes I make an edit, a cut, and it's really awkward because it doesn't line up. So I put like an image to smooth it out. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt like I wouldn't say it was building to that moment. I wouldn't go as far as to say that, but I felt like it was just a sort of a further expression of what you were saying and the way you were saying it in the song.
It's hopefully that I'm very, very pleased with that, but I did really struggle as to whether to put one in. Again, for those reasons that we discussed, but a lot of that, I mean, a lot of my professional life was spent playing guitar solos. It kind of felt like I was coasting in a way with the idea of it. The actual physical aspect of doing it, I wasn't coasting in the slightest.
Right.
I really wasn't. But the idea of doing a guitar solo is a little bit coasting for me.
That's interesting. Well, I wonder to what extent someone like Jeff Beck was thinking that a little bit, because things that for me would be challenging to do, like him using a slide past the point of the neck just to give a really cool sound. But to do that is millimeters of movement to get big changes, right? And he did it like it was just, a walk in the park. I wonder if he was thinking, well, I'll do it anyway, And for me, it was the part where I was going, how does he do that?
I think he was very, very smart. And he was very, very smart because what he did was he surrounded himself with people that pushed him.
Yeah.
So it kept him on that edge. And that's why Jeff Beck is generally very interesting. I think later on, these later albums where I felt he was coasting quite a bit. And he was coasting quite a bit because I don't think he had the push that, for example, I don't think he had any idea what he was doing in Blow by Blow. And I think he'd surrounded himself with musicians who were much better than him.
Mhm.
And that's why you got that. And he ended up with this masterpiece. So I think pushing yourself constantly is one of the most important things, because if you're not on the edge, why are you doing it?
I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you because I think that's a really interesting point. I will say that there are moments, though, where it's okay to sit back, enjoy that you've done that, and just let that, 12th fret note ring and just give it a little tremolo and just enjoy it and then jump back in,
I completely agree. I'm completely contradicting what I just said. For me, and that's a psychological thing, and I don't think it's particularly a healthy psychological thing. I've always had it. That's always been there, and even though I don't think it's healthy psychologically, I think sitting and enjoying what you're doing is massively important. I'm the same in everything. Pretty much every aspect of my life I always have been. So I used to be a long distance runner, and nothing is enough.
Yeah.
Nothing is, no distance is too far. No time is too quick. Or to put it the other way, nothing is good enough. So it's trying to balance that. And sometimes I do, a lot of times I don't. So I've got, I don't know, maybe enough material for 12 to 15 albums sitting there. And I can.
That's interesting. My one of my sisters, I have three sisters. One of them is a writer, and she's talked about that. She and I have talked about that, where, at what point do you just have to say, this is where it is, this is where it's going to be, and I'm going to let it fly and be free. Otherwise, I'll just keep on. I know in her case, several times she's burnt books worth of material because she thought, it's not good.
Yeah.
At some point and for some people, this is perfectly fine to never release anything. But if you want the world to hear your music or read your words or whatever the thing is you're creating, sometimes, like these songs, like I'm very thankful that you allowed these ones out, that you allowed us to hear them,
Thank you. That's very that's very complimentary. It kind of hit a point where I realised this is actually finished. And that I think is the most difficult thing with anything of, if you're going to put your soul into it, is this is actually finished. And it kind of came to the point that I didn't think I could improve it. And that was, I think that was maybe the 10 for something master.
Wow.
But they did get better. Each one got incrementally better. But I had at one point said to myself that, okay, I'm finished tracking. And I did go back and retrack things. So I retracked some drums and things like that. But I kind of hit the point, it's okay, I'm not going to do this anymore because it's literally going to drive me insane.
Yeah, if you decide, okay, I'm just not going to release it, and then we move on to the next thing. But if you decide, I want people to hear this, I have to at some point not let it drive me crazy, and I have to move on to just let it be, like let it have a life, I'm thinking about, for example, Upon the Midnight, because Alison Dowling, I believe, does sing on Upon the Midnight. the strings in that, there's, correct me if I'm wrong, there's like strings like violin, etc. sounds, and then there's like a sitar.
Oh, the middle guitar. What I did for that is I had 2 amps which are behind me. I turned them up very loud, mic'd them in stereo, and the tremolo is kind of moving between, but I had two mics and 2 amps. What I'm kind of doing is I'm bouncing on the tremolo arm.
Ah, okay.
That little pitch shift
Yeah.
is bouncing on the tremolo arm.
I'm gonna go back and listen to it because I said that with a question mark because I thought it kind of sounded like that, but I wasn't really sure. It wasn't clearly a sitar. It just had that sort of feel to it, and I wasn't sure exactly what it was. So you've explained
I
it.
cut all the lows right out of it below about 600 hertz as well. So there's none of the oomph that you get from a guitar string.
Right. Okay.
That was, or it wouldn't have fitted otherwise, basically.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, that there's so much volume in the box, you know, and if you've already filled up the bottom end, you have to cut it out of something like that part, which clearly worked really well because it hit my ears like, what is that, you know? So it worked.
Apart from the right-hand part, the tremolo is actually quite easy to play, the whammy bar stuff. The actual part was quite simple. Listen to it again, and essentially it's a Johnny Cash riff.
Really?
That kind of playing. The easiest way is if I grab a guitar and I play it.
Yeah.
I play something similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm not sure if you can still hear me. I'll just say that I often pride myself in picking out. It's very much like food. Oh, you don't have your
Headphones, I can't actually really get some tune now. No, is that better? Sorry.
Okay. Oh,
Basically,
it's not coming through here because I realized you don't have original sound for musicians on.
I need an actual white stick that helps me because I can't understand a 3D space anymore. But I didn't want to have a stick in the video.
Oh. I wouldn't have seen it actually because the angle that we have, I wouldn't have seen. But you didn't hear me say that, but there's a setting here on Zoom called original sound for musicians. It's turned off on your video, so I actually didn't hear what you just played. I just heard.
I'll make a little video.
I would love that. Thank you. Yeah, because I think that's very cool to give that little explanation. I was saying as well when you didn't have your headphones on, so I was just talking to myself. I was saying that I take pride in very much like food when I taste something and I say, "Oh, is there a little bit of this or that in there? You know, is that white pepper instead of black pepper?" You know, and I love doing that with music. And this was the reason I'm asking you about this specific moment in the album was because I couldn't tell if it was white pepper or black pepper or something else. I couldn't tell what it was.
I've done my job then.
Well, I think I started off with the question, why do I love this album so much? And I love mysteries. I used to read or listen to Sherlock Holmes stories all the time.
I'm a Sherlock Holmes nut.
Oh, okay. I have been for as long as I can remember, but I stopped listening to or reading them because I know all the stories. So
Yeah, same. You read the first paragraph, you know who did it, why they did it.
yeah, and well, I think that it comes back to what you said about rock music. I understand what you're saying. In fact, I had that conversation with one of my sisters recently, saying that I haven't been listening to classic rock lately for the same reason. I know the storyline. I know he finds the paper in the garbage can.
It's that, yeah, that's part of the reason I don't listen to rock music in general. It's a Sherlock Holmes factor.
That's what I'm going to call it from now on. It's absolutely that. And I think that's part of the reason I love this album. I mean, my own music as well. I use samples of of spoken parts as well, like you did. So I identified with that as a musician, as a songwriter. That was part of what I loved about it. And the fact that I couldn't pick out what some of the flavors were. And part of that is a bigger picture of that. I'm not talking only about guitar licks and guitar riffs or whatever. The thing about music is we have all of our influences, and to what extent, how do we mix all those together, like spices, you know? And there were moments where I couldn't really tell, is that a gospel influence, or is that more like early rock and roll, so clearly influenced by by gospel music? Was it one of those? I couldn't really tell, you know?
I'm never going home again. It's too long that I've been gone. I'm burning bridges on my way. I'm never going home again.
I'm not confident about my vocal at all.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Really?
One of the original intentions was to different people singing every song.
Right.
And this was due to because I just didn't want to do it. So part of the reason I get into using speech samples, apart from creating atmosphere, was I'm just not confident about the singing.
One of the things I loved is that you're not singing throughout, so I kind of felt like when you did sing, it was like the person who's quiet in a conversation and only pipes up when they have something really interesting to say.
Thank you. I bizarrely have a different vocal tone depending on the key, and I don't know why that is. I've actually got a tear in my larynx from years and years and years ago, so I don't know if that's something to do with it, but also a lot of things you're taking as female vocals on the record are me.
That's interesting.
So on what song was that? I'd Love You To. Apart from a singer I used to work with who came in to basically just solidify that high pitch, all those high pitches are me.
That's just you singing like in a falsetto, or is that, how'd you do that?
Attempting a falsetto, and in We're Immortal, apart from the kind of Arabic women sample at the end of it, all the vocals are me.
Wow.
We are immortal.
that was interesting too, because I mean, I have heard vocal samples used really, really well. Tilburg is the name of this project by a guy who used it to the point where I actually thought it was a singer. He was so good at using it, and I was amazed. And I've heard it used where it was clearly a sample, and that can be done well or not well as well on that side of things. But the fact that you're saying that some of those vocals that I thought were female vocals were you, I mean, falsetto is something, when the Bee Gees did falsetto, you didn't think it was a lady singing. Or, you know.
I was quite surprised by it. I kind of ended up with falsettos because I'd layered up vocals and layered up, and there was an obvious frequency gap at the top. I would write the high vocal part on the piano and record it as MIDI. And then I would try and sing along with that in isolation. I would record that, and then I would use Melodyne on it. Melodyne's, it's not auto-tune because you have a lot more control over it, but it's basically corrects pitch. And I would correct the pitch to where I felt it should be that I physically wasn't able to do. Then I would learn how to do that. So basically I used Melodyne. I would get the vocals to kind of where they should be, and then I would learn how to do that. So I did that very, very frequently. So for example, drum parts, I would quantize them from the rough parts. I didn't play all the drums, I programmed some of them. The drums that are really complex sounding, I programmed.
Okay.
Because I couldn't physically play them. And I would use all the modern production tools available. Then I would take that as my guide to here's how I should do it. So it kind of took the focus off me of, should I go for this note? Should I go for X note? I don't know how to get to this note. I had a reference point to work it out. So that took a very long time. You've been in various bands over the years, and do you know how you can pick a song and there's one instrument that has the focus of it? It could be the bass line in one song, could be the keyboard line in another song, etc., etc. Almost until the end of it, I had no idea what was the important part in each song.
Mm.
So as I kind of experimented and changed the grooves and changed the songs a little, I would have to re-record everything.
Wow.
So I maybe did that for each song somewhere between 5 and 10 times.
Oh, ow. It hurts my heart to hear it.
It hurt my head to do it.
Oh, wow.
So if you take the last song, Brother's Keeper, which is probably the most difficult song I've ever written or played, I think. It wasn't until I'd recorded everything that I realised the whole song hinged around the clavinet part. And once I then realised that I could play every instrument in relation to the clavinet part,
mm-hmm.
You know, the clavinet part's actually quite quiet and you don't hear it as an important part. It's a hinge for everything else.
She said, are you not your brother's keeper? She said, are you not your father's son? Flowers don't float, they never
Every song, something like that happened. and every part had to be replaced over and over again as the groove slightly changed. But if I was in a room, let's say with 10 people playing, I would need about 10 people to play the first song, Liberty Moksha. In a room, as a band leader, I could say, okay, let's all focus in on that, and that one person would play it, and the band would all come together around that. But because I'm playing everything myself, that option wasn't available to me.
That's really interesting, because it's funny, that's one of the things that I do with my students. Very often what I'll do with my students is I'll have them sit in a semicircle, and I'll just have them play, and I'll say, okay, let's say we're looking at measure 5 to measure 15. Who has the melody here? I could ask 3 different classes for the same piece of music and possibly get 3 different answers. And what you're saying, sitting in a room by yourself, listening to yourself, playing all of the different parts, it could be really hard to figure out.
You don't have that. Yeah. This is going to sound odd and counterintuitive, but you can't figure it out until you figured it out. You've got to go through each thing that seems sensible to work out where the, again, I call it the hinge, where the hinge of the music is. And quite often, the part that was in the hinge I've actually removed from the final record. I used to play in a band called the Funk Guys and Hangover Band, so I played a lot in funk and soul bands, as well as other things, reggae bands and rock bands and drum and bass and techno and country and jazz, whatever. Often used to do, we would all be jamming round a part that it wasn't actually there.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
We kind of did it instinctively, but it might have been some kind of little part that was the original riff that everyone started jamming on.
Right.
But it's still there, and to me it's the same idea as if you listen to a jazz band. Mm-hmm. They're playing off some variation of some 30s standard.
Yeah.
That nobody actually seems to be playing, but they actually are. But they're not, if you know what I mean. So a lot of the record was that for me.
Just,
I think anybody that records everything themselves, you're going to face that.
I'm trying to think if I ran into that moment where I think actually, yes, I have, because I just thought of a song that I put together called Birth of a Star. And it started off as just as a solo piano thing. And little by little, I thought, it'd be cool if I could add in like some sort of rhythm to drive it a bit, Long story short, it's about 60 tracks of various things. There's like a bassoon in there, and I don't know what. Well, I'll tell you, I have listened to each one of your songs several times. I give every song at least 3 listens, and then I write down the things that I notice as I'm listening. I've turned it into a blog post. For anybody who takes the time, I'll be putting the links to Bandcamp, and you just said that you're happy to share some codes so people can listen to it. The code allows you to download it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think really, aside from the little clips that I'm going to be sharing here, it is very well worth listening to it, as we talked about, from track 1 to the last track. Take it as a story, thematic sort of ride.
Let's catch the last train to Lisbon like Okie and McCulloch.